Welcome to Sunday Showers from the Source. My name is Patrice Hunt, and thank you for joining me this Sunday. This Sunday, I decided to kind of go back 2 Sundays ago, not last Sunday, but the Sunday before, when we talked about the invisible hand of God, trusting God in the unseen. And it was just because there were, like I said, I think I said this last week, that there were some things that I just felt like I kind of missed the mark, that I didn't focus on. And I wanted to make sure that I talked about it and focused on it, because I didn't want to miss anything where this subject was concerned, mainly because I just felt like it was just so near and dear to my heart. Because I do feel like there are things that are going on in our life right now that maybe we aren't seeing yet, that God is working things out in ways that we haven't yet gotten to the point where we can visually see it in the human realm. And he's working things out in the spiritual realm while we're in the physical realm waiting for it to come to pass, or for us to get to the point where it's time to come to pass. And week before last, I talked about how and if you haven't seen it, I'm going to link the episode right here. But last week we talked about how how I got my daughter this doll that she had been wanting for Christmas, and she had been trying to figure out how to get it in her own power, how to have enough money to save up for it, and she was going to settle for something less than what she really, really wanted, because she felt like she couldn't get what she really, really wanted. And so I talked about all these things and how she was just going through really desiring for this doll, wanting this doll, trying to figure out how she was going to get this doll, because she just knew she wanted it, and there was no evidence that she was going to receive it. And I talked about how all that time that she was doing that, I already had the doll. The doll was here at the house, but it was her Christmas gift. So she had to get the Christmas to open it. And I talked about how that's how God works with us. There are things that we desire, and that there are things that we want, and if we're being quite honest, need in a lot of situations, that God has already provided for in the spiritual realm. And we just have to kind of get to that point in time. And there are so many, so that's what I talked about 2 weeks ago. And there are so many examples in the Bible about that we can use to see how that has worked. And how God's timing is not our timing. His way is not our way. And if we really think about the sovereignty of God, God knows from eternity past, from the beginning, before Genesis 1:1, and he knows what's going to happen and how it's going to end. He's seen it all in his omnipotence and his sovereignty. He knows everything. And the interesting part that I've heard said before is that we have our lifespan in the grand scheme of God's sovereignty is like minuscule. But to us, it's huge. And for God to function and to work in such a way that our little minuscule life still warrants his interceding and his working things out on our behalf is amazing. And because of that, sometimes we can feel like God is so big. He has so much going on. There are children starving in other countries. There are earthquakes and tsunamis, and there is genocide, and there are all of these things that really warrant God's attention and his interceding. But a lot of times, sometimes we feel that our little things don't necessarily warrant it. And because of that, then we start trying to figure it out on our own. We start trying to make it happen on our own. And I think that's kind of what happened with my daughter. It was kind of, she knows the financial situation that we have going on, and the doll was kind of expensive. And so she was probably thinking, this is not going to happen. Like, my parents are not going to buy this for me. So I have to make it happen myself. And how many times have we as Christians done that to God? like felt like, oh, my little problem, my little issue, my little want or desire does not warrant God's hand to come in and intercede on my behalf, because in the grand scheme of things, in the grand scheme of his sovereignty and everything else that he has on his plate, my thing is not that big of a deal. But God loves us and he's our father, and anything that we have going on that's a big deal to us, that matters to us, matters to him. And so a lot of times I think that what happens is we try to take things into our own power and into our own way, just because we just want it to work when we want it to work, how we want it to work. And because we feel like maybe that's God isn't working in the time frame we think he should, or the way we think he should, then we feel like, oh, well, let me take the reins, let me take control of it. But sometimes, I can sit here and say, oh, but we should always just be patient and trust God and wait on God. But that's easier said than done. I'm going to be honest and say that it's definitely easier said than done. But I will also say that it's worth it, because what God has for us, it is for us. What God has for you, it is for you, nobody else. And the great thing about it is when God gives it to you, no one can take it away. And when God gives it to you, you know that you'll be equipped and ready for it, prepared for it, because he's already gotten you to where he needed you to be before he gave it to you in the first place. I think some of the interesting things about, especially when we're reading in the Old Testament, is all these prophets who prophesied the coming of the Messiah and spoke on all of these different things, and they never got to see it. They were able to prophesy and prophesy and prophesy, and they had such prophetic words from God, but they were not able to physically see it themselves during their lifetime. And that fact doesn't make the fact that the prophecy was true null and void. It just means that they didn't get to see it, you know? And so I think that a lot of times we feel like God is taking too long. We feel like, oh my goodness, I have been dealing with this for such a long time, and it seems like God is not here. He's not fixing it. He's not doing anything about it. It seems like he doesn't care. But in his word, in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9, it says that God is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but for everyone to come to repentance. So this was talking about salvation, but I think it fits in all aspects of our life as far as how God blesses us and provides for us. He's not slow. He's patient. And he's waiting for us to get to where he needs us to be spiritually, physically, emotionally, as well as maturity wise, so that we can not only just receive what he has for us, but also so that we can be good stewards over it. And I talked last week before last about how it would be wrong if I put my daughter, my oldest daughter, if I would have gotten her a car for her 16th birthday when I knew that she was not yet ready to have her own car or to drive, on her own. And so that's because I'm her parent, because I'm her mom, and I know what's best for her. And I know when she's ready and when she's not ready. I made the unilateral decision. Well, my husband and I made the decision that no, that's not something that we should do for her. Like, even if somebody was to say, oh, we're going to gift her this car. No, she's not ready for a car yet. And so that's how God does us. He knows what we're ready for, what we're not ready for, because he doesn't want to give us something too prematurely, so that we will abort the potential or the blessings that could come along with this that we're asking him for. Because a lot of times when we are trusting and believing God for something and it seems like it's taking him a long time to do it, it's because he's actually doing work in us. And he's doing these things and this stuff that he's molding us and making us into who he needs us to be, so that when he does give it to us, that we don't squander it. In John chapter 4, verses like 43 to about 54, it tells the story about the government official whose son was sick, and he went to Jesus and asked him to heal him. And I mean, Jesus had just healed, talked with a Samaritan woman and all of that. And so he's coming off of all that. And he's like, come on now. The only way you people will believe is if you get some kind of miraculous sign. And the guy's like, okay, but can you just please heal my son? And so he says, you may go. Your son will live. And so what happens after this, the man turns and he starts, on his journey back home. And about the next day after he was on his way back home, his servant met him on the road and was like, Master, your son has been healed. Your son has been healed. And so the official was like, okay, what? Like, he was just so surprised. He's like, when did this happen? And he told him it was the day before around noon. I think that's what it said. Actually, it said around the 7th hour. So he then the official realized, oh, this was the same time that Jesus said that he would live. He said that I could go because he would live. And that's the same time that my son was healed. And so I'm sure he was just like, oh, had that confirmation, like what he said, what he said he was going to do, he actually did it. But another part of me, another thing that I find interesting and where I want to kind of stick my pin in this story is the fact that the officer this government official was on his way home. And I don't know, I'm assuming, like, if I was a servant, I would assume that if my master's son had been sick unto death and then he got better, that I would be like hightailing it immediately to my master to tell him, hey, your son is going to live. And so I would assume that he left as soon as his son started showing signs and showed that he was going to live, to go meet his master and tell him that. And so if I'm making that assumption, I'm also assuming that it took the master was probably a 2-day journey from his home. He left from where Jesus was and he started on his way home. And then the next day is when his servant met him. So I just put myself in that situation, and I just feel like, you know what? Like, if I was that government official, I would be traveling home with hope, like hoping that Jesus was who he said he was and that he could do what he said he could do. But I would also probably just have a little bit of doubt. I would have a little bit of anxiety, but I would also have a little bit of anticipation in what he could really do, and me going home and finding my son alive. I would also have a little dread that what if I do get home and he's not healed and this Jesus person is not who he said he was, as I'm traveling back home. And the interesting thing, and the reason I wanted to stick my pin in this part, is because that's how we are. We are traveling, we're on the road of life, and there's something that we asked God for. There's something that we're trusting and believing God for, but we have not yet seen it. We haven't gotten there yet. And so as this official was traveling and getting to his home, he probably had this mix of emotions, because he didn't know if what Jesus said was going to happen was really going to happen. And so we kind of sit in that situation when we're waiting on God. We have this mix of emotion. We're anticipating that what he said that he would do, he would do. We're anticipating that the promises of God will prevail in our life. We're anticipating that when he says that what he wants for us is good, that it's true. We're anticipating that what we desire also lines up with what he desires for us. And so that way we'll get it. But what we don't realize is sometimes, half the time, it's already been worked out. We just got to make it home. So this government official just had to make it home. And then that's how he would see that his son had already been healed. Another story from the Bible that made me think of, God working things out and providing for us and things like that is the story of Elijah in 1 Kings 17, 1 through 16. And what happens is Elijah has prophesied the famine. So he's announced God is going to allow a famine and it's going to hit. Um, and so what God does is he sends Elijah out to the Cherith Ravine to live. And when he does this, he provides everything Elijah needs. He has ravens bringing him meat and bread for breakfast and dinner. Um, he is seated next to the mouth of the brook, and that's where he drinks his water from. And so he is being completely and utterly provided for by God in this situation. But then the brook dries up because this famine continues to go on and on. And so when the brook dries up, after the brook dries up, God sends him to Zarephath. And when he sends him to Zarephath, he tells him to meet this widow and her son, this widow with a son, and ask her for some bread. And so that's what he does. He says he sees this woman, and God tells him to ask her for some bread. Now, the backstory for the widow is that she didn't, the famine was affecting her as well. And with the famine affecting her, they only had a little bit of oil and a little bit of flour. And she was like, okay, I'm about to take this oil and this flour, put it together, make some bread, and then me and my son are going to die. And so when Elijah asked her for the bread to make her some bread, she told him that story. I don't have a lot. This is all I have. And what I have, me and my son are going to eat it and then we're going to die. And Elijah was like, okay, well, but first, before you make your bread and then get ready to die, make me some. Make me just a little bit of bread and bring it to me. And so that's what she did. She took the little flour, she took the little oil, and then she made the bread and she gave Elijah a small loaf, and then she made some for her son. Then Elijah prophesied and told her that God said that this flour jar will not become empty, and this oil jar will never run dry until he sends the rain. And the one of the things about this story that when I read it, and the reason this was interesting to me is because I feel like there have been times that the times I've been going through in my life for the last couple of years have been very intentional. There have been things that God has really placed on my heart and things that God has allowed us to go through. And it's a reason for it. And he has definitely sustained us, just like he sustained Elijah in the Cherith Ravine, like where it's literally like for his sheer necessity to be alive, like the basic things that Elijah needed to be alive, God provided for him as he sat and stayed at the Cherith Ravine. He provided meat and bread and water for Elijah to live. And so I feel like that's where we have been, that's where we are, where God is literally providing exactly what we need for us to get through. The interesting part about this, where it's saying when he goes to Zarephath and he stays with the lady, is that in the scripture, God didn't tell Elijah to leave and go to Zarephath until after the ravine had dried up, not before. And he could have, because God is all powerful, all knowing, he's sovereign. He could have said, you know what, Elijah, this ravine is about to dry up and I don't want you to thirst. I don't want you to be in need or in want. So before it dries up, I want you to go to Zarephath. But that's not what he did. After the ravine dried up. And I don't know, it doesn't say how long. It could have been, the day before Elijah had water in the ravine. And then that next morning he woke up, there was no water. Or it could have been one day there was water and then the next day there wasn't. And then Elijah sat there for a week or whatever the case may be before God sent him to Zarephath. But the thing is that God had already made a provision, but he had to get Elijah to the right point. That lady had to be running out of oil so that God could bless her and her son, as well as show her and her son his provisions and his blessings. And then he used it to bless Elijah as well. And so if he had her, if his God's timing, that this puts a pit like this illuminates God's timing in our lives, and how sometimes we feel like God is slow, or God is not moving, or he is not doing anything in our lives. But it's that he needs to get us to the point where he needs us to be, so that he could do the things he desires to do, because he has a plan. And I think a lot of times we forget that. We get so consumed and so wrapped up in what our plan is and what we desire for our own lives, that we just think that, oh, God is here to be our genie that I've talked about before. Like, we think that he's the genie in the lamp, and we just kind of rub the lamp, and then he's supposed to answer our prayers. But that's not who he is. God is the ultimate. He has the ultimate say so, and he should have the ultimate say so in our lives. And so how it should go is that his plan supersedes our plan, and anything he desires of us and for us is what we desire. And so, but a lot of times we get so wrapped up in what our plan is that we get focused on what our plan is. And when it's not going that way, then we're just like, woe is me. God is not working. God is not doing anything. He's not answering my prayer. But the case is that it's not that he's not answering your prayers. It's that he's trying to line up what he has for you with what his plan is. And so sometimes his plans for our lives and somebody else's lives overlap, because he wants to bless somebody else, or sometimes he wants somebody to bless us. And so in this case, he was blessing the widow, and he used the way that he was blessing the widow to also bless Elijah. And so he allowed the brook to run dry, and Elijah had to just sit there and just trust and believe that whatever God told him to do was going to be what was right, and that God was going to sustain him through it all. And that's what he did. Another thing that this story, um, another thing that this story brought up to me was that our faith is often developed during times of uncertainty. When he was sitting there next to that brook, he did not know, um, God sent him. He told him it was going to be a famine, and then he sent them to the Cherith Ravine. He didn't say go to the Cherith Ravine, and when you get there, I'm going to make ravens bring you food, and you're gonna drink from the brook. He sent him there and then made the provisions for him after his obedience. He was obedient to God. God sent him, he went, and he was obedient. And so a lot of times when what we feel is uncertainty, and we don't know, like, oh, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if it doesn't? Or what if something completely positive happens? And a lot of times we'll um, delay our blessings, or miss our blessings, or miss what God is trying to do in our lives, because we get so consumed with how we think it's supposed to be done. Like, we think, okay, this is what I want. I want a new job. And God is like, no, but I want to bless you in a different way. I want to bless you to own your own business. I want to bless you to travel the world. I want to bless you to do this, that, or the other. I want to bless you in a way that you're going to now be a missionary to another country, and you're going to sacrifice your life and your everyday life and what you're used to for me, but I'm going to bless you so tremendously through it that I'm placing this on your heart to do. And it's like, yeah, but that don't look like what I wanted. That's not like what my plan is. But God, he just is so sovereign that that we have to realize that our plans uh, pale in comparison to what his desires and his plans are for us. And so when we go through things, when we go through uncertain times and God brings us through them, or he uses us in a certain way, or he takes us somewhere that we didn't think that we would go to do something didn't think that we would do, that's when our faith is increased. That's when our love and our hope and our dependency on God is developed. Our relationship with God is developed even more. I mean, let's take this podcast. Like, I would have not thought, like, prior to actually when he placed this on my heart, I had never thought of doing a podcast. I never thought of getting on YouTube and making videos and putting it out there. I never imagined doing something like this. But he has given me a passion for it. And he has also used it in a way to fuel other parts of my life. And that's been a blessing in and of itself. And I mean, it's a sacrifice of time. That's all it is. It's a sacrifice of my time and my obedience. And if, I mean, he's God, so why wouldn't I give him that? Why wouldn't I make that sacrifice freely for him? Because he made the ultimate, because Jesus Christ made the ultimate sacrifice for me. The next thing I want to talk about, the next thing I want to say is, what would happen to our faith in God if we already knew specifically how he was going to bless us? Like if Elijah already knew that, oh, okay, when I get there, this is what he's going to do. Do you think he would have been like, oh yeah, God, I'm going to eat some bread and some meat from some nasty ravens' mouths? Do you think he would have did that? Or do you think he would have doubted, like, God, really? Like ravens eat the dead and rotting flesh of an animal. And so I don't know. I'm not going to say what Elijah, because Elijah was a prophet. He trusted and believed in God tremendously. Um, but I just want to say, if God told me, hey, Patrice, go on over to the Cherith Ravine, and when you get there, I'm going to allow ravens to feed you. Like, that's how I'm going to sustain you. You're going to drink, you're going to cup some water out of that brook, and you're going to drink that water out of that brook. And then the raven's going to bring you bread and meat for breakfast and dinner. I think I would be like, God, ravens eat nasty stuff, and you want to use their mouth to bring me something to feed me? I'm probably like, can we do this another way? Can you just pop up a Chick-fil-A right there? It is of God. That chicken is of God. Can you just put it right here? And then we can just have a thank you, my pleasure type of situation. But sometimes if we know ahead of time, I feel like if we knew ahead of time how God planned on blessing us, one thing is we could doubt it. We could do like I just did, like try to tell him how we think he should bless us. Like, okay, yeah, God, you're gonna give me ravens every day, but I think I would prefer if you gave me Chick-fil-A every day. We can sit back on our laurels and just wait for the time to come and do no spiritual work in our lives. But when we have to wait on God and wait to see how he's going to do his, what his plan is and how his plan of action is going to come, then that's where the faith is increased. That's when we become closer to him in our relationship. That's when we get to hear that still small voice of God. That's when we can be led by him, because we are literally on the precipice or on the edge of our seat trying to hear from him, because we're leaning and depending on him at all times. And so when we are in the situation where we need him and we need him to show up, and we don't, like, if he don't do it, then it won't get done type of situations, that's when our faith is increased. That's when our relationship and our love for him and all of those other things are expanded and improved upon. And so I think that if we knew specifically how God was going to bless us, I don't think it would be beneficial to us at all. I don't think that it would go well for us at all. The next thing I wanted to say is Jesus, Emmanuel, means God with us. So everywhere when we refer to Jesus, like the Emmanuel, they have that song, Emmanuel, and all that. That means that God is with us. And so this is really how Elijah was being sustained in the Cherith Ravine, how Elijah and the woman and her son were being sustained during the famine with the oil, and the oil and the flour. It never said that the oil was filled up to the brim or that the flour was filled up to the brim. It just was kind of one of those situations where what she needed, it was in there. When it was time to make the bread, she could make the bread. When it was time to use the flour, she could use the flour. When it was time to use the oil, she could use the oil. And so in this situation, God was with them every step of the way. He was God Emmanuel. He was with them for each step in each situation, and he was sustaining them. And this story lets us know that that's the way that God is with us too. He's with us in each step and with each situation, no matter what, no matter whether we can see him or not. He's there and he's sustaining us in every situation, and he's working things out in the background where just because we don't see it, it doesn't mean that it's not getting done. Proverbs Proverbs 4, 6, and 7 says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And then Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. And to me, both of these verses is just God knows what he's doing. Take your hands off of it and allow him to take control of it. When it's telling us don't be anxious about anything, but in everything with by prayer and petition and with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. God's got it. That's what it's saying. Don't be worrying. Don't be anxious. Don't be anticipating. Don't be doubtful. Trust God. That's what you need to do. And then when it's in Proverbs where it's saying, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. Because sometimes our understanding makes us feel like we know what's best. We know what the plan should be. But God is the ultimate sovereign God of the universe. He knows what the plan should be. He already made the plan before we were a twinkling in our parents' eyes. But we want to take control and take the reins. And when we do that, it's like we want to take the reins from God. And then guiding ourselves right off the cliff. And then it's like, as we're rolling down, oh, help me, Lord, help me. When you should have just let him keep the reins in the first place. And so when things look tough, when things look hard, when things are just downright bleak, we have to trust him. And we talked about last week. It's in First Kings 19, 11 through 13, where we talked about how God appeared to Elijah. And when he was saying, like, they were like, oh, there was a great thunder, there was a great earthquake, but God wasn't in an earthquake. He wasn't in the thunder. He wasn't in the fire. Then there was a still whisper, a gentle whisper, and that's what God was in. And so a lot of times when we want God to show up, when we're expecting God, we want him to show up with the miracles. We want the earthquakes. We want the wind. We want the fire. But living our lives with God, honestly, when we live our lives every day with God, we come to realize that he is always there. He's that constant whisper. He's that gentle whisper in our lives. And we just have to trust that God is with us, even when there seems to be no visual manifestation of him in our lives, when we can't see his fingerprints, when we feel like he's not doing anything. We just have to remain trustful and dependent upon him, knowing that who he says he is really who he is. And I think one of the analogies that I was using, that I wrote down to use, was like when we go to a concert, we see, we get hyped and we're just in front looking at the performer, whoever that performer may be, just giving their all on stage. But what we miss is the set building. We miss the props. We miss the lighting person. We miss the camera person that makes sure that if you're in the nosebleeds, you can still see on that big jumbotron, like you're right center front row. But we miss all of that because it's happening behind the scenes. All we do is see the performer. And in life, that's how we want it to be. We put so much focus on the performer that we miss what's happening behind the scenes. And God does some of his best work behind the scenes. And so I don't want us to miss out on seeing all that God is doing and working in our lives because we're so focused on the performer. We're so focused on that one thing that we miss how all this is put together. Because honestly, if you think about it, if there was no set being built, if there was no lighting guy, if there was no camera person, if there was no band, backup dancers, music, sound guy, the concert couldn't go off without a hitch. Everything needed to be done precisely and in order. And that's how God does. He does everything precisely and in order so that when the time comes for the performance or for this blessings, for this blessing to be manifested in our lives, not only will we be ready for it, but everything will be in line in the way it needs to be so that we can receive it, so that we can walk into his promises and his blessings. So I just wanted to take a moment to delve a little bit deeper into what we talked about week before last. And I hope that something was said that really touched your heart, that God used to bless you and speak to you. And yeah, I think that this story of Elijah um, means a lot to me right now, because um, I feel like the story is speaking to me, just, with the famine and everything going on. And I feel like right now, just where we are in our life, we're making a move. And so I said on Instagram one day this week, about how I felt like in 2023, God was planting the seeds. And then in 2024, he used our tears of 2024 to water those seeds, and that in 2025 we're going to move forward and sprout those blessings, those provisions. All that he wants to do in our lives is going to start to sprout. And I also talked about how it might not look like you think it would. It might not be what sprouts might not be. Like, you might think you planted um, okra, and God is like, oh yeah, but what's going to grow is banana peppers. Type of situation, because you might think, oh, I was praying for a husband, and I'm praying and praying and praying for a husband, but then he might move you to another city for a job or something like that. So I just want us to be open to his movement in our lives and to his direction, and just trust that whatever he's doing in the background is going to just make it, is what needs to be done, and two, that when it comes to fruition, that it is going to be more than what we could have ever asked or imagined, even if it doesn't look like what we thought it was going to look like, even if it's not exactly how we thought it was going to be. So I thank you so much for joining me this Sunday, and I just pray that something was said or done that will bless you. So if you want prayer or anything like that, just please email me at showersfromthesource@gmail.com. I'm going to put it right here. So you'll have it. And I also put it in the description box. So if there's anything that you want prayer over, or if you just want to reach out, please email me and I will respond. So yeah, I hope you are blessed, and I pray that everyone has a great week ahead, and I'll see you next Sunday. Bye.